Welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute's worth or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. We are your hosts, Alex and Christian Giebert, and today's moment comes from the beloved Goldberg Variations. This is variation number 16, Overture. Ouverture. Ouverture?
It is written French way.
Ouverture?
Ouverture. Ouverture. Deep into the Goldberg Variations. After hearing the aria that the Goldberg Variations will all be based on, we're getting into the 13, 14, 15 area. Coming up into 15, we're reaching what is essentially a halfway point between 15 and 16. Now, 15 is a canon with a freely written bass line. A canon in two parts with a third part in the left hand. The formula for the Goldberg Variations is that every 3 movements is a canon, and each canon has its second part, its answering part, coming in one interval wider than the last one, which means that by 15 we are at the canon at the 5th. However, it is very different than all of the other movements before it because it's in G minor. We haven't had G minor yet. It only happens 3 times across all 31 parts of the Goldbergs, and what a strange and wonderful contrast it makes. Especially since it is a canon, but also the canon is inverted, so the answer goes the opposite direction.
Yeah, it's so cool. Minor is already kind of an opposite of major in tonal music like this. So he's doing like 2 opposites.
It is, and to be clear, it's much more than just going to a relative minor key that shares notes. Because we're in G major for most of the Goldberg Variations, because the aria is in G major. And it would be perfectly normal to spend time in E minor for a while in a piece that's in G major. And in fact, they share all of the same basic pitches, with some small exceptions, almost all the same notes as G major would have. That's called relative minor and relative major. And there's really nothing to that. In fact, a piece in E minor in this period of history would spend so much of the middle of itself in the relative major of G major that it would almost seem as though that happy key of G major was where you were going to end if you didn't then go back to E minor. But none of the Goldberg Variations are in E minor. Instead, we move from being in G major for so long into G minor, which is the parallel minor. G minor and G major are parallel minor and major to each other. When we hit 15, we've already heard about 40 minutes of G major, if you're taking all the repeat signs, which you should, and our harpsichordist Jean Rondeau does do that. So it's a stark contrast. The melody, the subject, which immediately starts to step down in a very languishing and sad, weeping way, is immediately subverted by the second bar where the answer starts to go up because it's the inversion. And even though Bach didn't have to do this, it's actually a perfectly chromatic. It's yep. Perfect. Like it's whole step, half step.
It's a perfect reflection. Yeah, I was wondering if you're gonna point that out.
It's a mirror. It's a perfect mirror.
And only the melodic minor scale allows for that. I mean, it makes sense that he used that scale anyway, just in the context of this minor tonality. But it's cool that it's perfect reflection. Yeah.
It is, at least at the beginning.
Yeah, the first few bars.
It doesn't really happen very often. And it does get pretty dense, but we should talk sometime in more detail about the end of a big section, but not the actual very end of a large piece, because I'm kind of obsessed with that idea. And here, we're about to end 15. There should naturally be some sort of separation here if you are a person who thinks numerically about the halfway point of something. And Bach was very much a person who thought about numbers, and this is a very basic example. He did decide that the Goldbergs would be effectively split in half. The formula for canons and stuff does not start over, but there is something about the space between 15 and 16 that is something of a restart. But what a way to end the first half of the Goldberg Variations, not with a powerful and broad, scary G minor chord or triad at the end. No, instead, the lower voice, which started first in the canon, is going to end, and that's going to happen on the last measure downbeat. The bass line is going to meet it there and then do one last little ornament down to do at the bottom. The follower voice, the answer of the canon, which is lagging one measure behind exactly, is now, instead of stepping down, compelled to step up. But it ends on a stark and bare D with a G way down the bottom that's already going away, and then just a G, and then a D up on the top. There is a B flat in there that gives the G minor chord some color, and it helps resolve that lingering C, which is finally resolved by the B flat 4 notes later. So he really makes you wait for that, but then it just keeps going. And then it just ends openly. There's such a starkness, even in this recording, to this single string of this harpsichord D. It's so desolate. It's like a desert. It's like parched for thirst, it seems like. And yet, it's open in a way that suggests that we could start again in G major in a happier way. And so the next part, the space in between 15 and 16, we will not play for you, listeners, because Rondeau takes at least 45 or 50 seconds of a pause here. He is purposely marking a division here with silence in this performance. He's also seeming to sort of mentally reset into something that's completely different. And now for something completely different. Variation 16, Overture, a French Ouverture, actually. And it is written O-U, the spelling of the word overture. So let's do an introduction to music appreciation question. Where does the overture belong?
At the beginning?
Yeah, at the beginning. Arguably, I mean, usually you could say like before the beginning. It's before the, even like, it's the setup, it's the introduction.
It's before the players come out on stage, right? You know, it's before the actors.
Yeah, before the opera starts or what have you.
Yeah.
Sometimes Bach opens a cantata with an overture, and we see that over and over again. But here, he didn't do that. In the Goldberg Variations, he was not able to do that because the arias, everything is based on. But he also didn't start number 1 with an overture either. Isn't that delightfully strange and unexpected that at the halfway point there would be an overture, as if to say there's a lot more, but we're also kind of starting again. It's not just a middle, it's also another beginning, and it's also an end. And we put to rest the strange, ghostly hauntings of 15, and now we're on to 16. And then we're going to have a second half of the Goldberg Variations that's 100% carefree and happy? No, we're not, actually. Because we have some of the most devastatingly sad music in G minor waiting for us later on. But we're not worried about that right now. We're having a happy French overture, as though the royalty is entering in the court. Complete with all of these ornaments, many of which Rondeau has added that are not necessarily in the score, and also filling out chords that he does that are not necessarily big chords in the score, like the last chord is filled out considerably. The first note is ornamented, the top note of 4 written notes, where no ornament is written in the score. He adds that. And then these exciting bolts all the way up to these high notes, characteristic of the French overture, and the double dotting dun, ba-dum thing that we see in this style of music is present here as well. I really love what he does in measure 16 of this. It's the first ending, so it's basically right at the end, first section before the first repeat. Oh. It's just a very florid arpeggiation. It's written, of course, as just a whole note by Bach in the right hand, but what he does is a multiplicity of arpeggiated notes on that D major chord. He does. Very appropriate to the style. He rolls it up and down, and he adds actually more pitches than are written in the score there, which I think Bach would have not actually been too mad about, because it's completely appropriate, makes sense. And he has added, it sounds like, a full triad down at the bottom with an octave above, but he doesn't hold those down on the first go, so that it's not too muddy, and then an extra D below the top D that's written. So he's added, I think, 4 notes to this 4-note chord. Yeah. And there's other instances in Bach harpsichord music that's not just in Goldberg's, where Bach voices chords kind of unusually, and he only ever does this in harpsichord as far as I know, where it'll be just this big triad in the left hand in a low range, and then a high triad in the right hand in a high range with a big blank spot in the middle. I think he just knows that harpsichord sounds the way it does, and that's going to be fine. A lot of times if you have the octave coupled on, which a lot of these harpsichords would, then that doesn't really matter, because that middle octave is going to be covered. That's because true. That low octave is going to add the octave above it, so now your middle octave is covered. Now what you get is just a very rich tone. And besides that, those thicker textures in the bottom sound better on harpsichord than they do on piano. Yes, that's a good point. Piano deep end is really boomy. The piano, like, deep low notes it can be satisfying in like a intense way, but there's actually not the body of sound and clarity of bass tone that you get with like a double bass or cello, for example, or like low organ. Absolutely. It has power, but it's missing clarity. And those early prototype pianos, one of which Bach got to play, but then which became more popular, and of course, like Mozart piano sonatas were, fairly early in the life of the instrument itself. And the pianos in Mozart's day were different, and they were a little closer in tone, at least in the bass end of the instrument, to what you would hear. And in other words, they were a little more clear in the bass while sacrificing power in the bass. That's right, yeah. Our instrument now, the modern piano, is really dynamic and extreme softs and louds, but missing that. Even Beethoven's time, there's a lot of Beethoven keyboard music that I used to think had such ugly, complete position triads way down, way too low in the left hand. But it's just, it only sounds bad on a modern piano. And on the instrument of his day, which was not quite the same, you can hear performances of it on the authentic instrument. It sounds great. Yeah. There's a lot of wonderful piano performances of Goldberg Variations, but this movement never does it for me on the piano. No. This French overture thing is so baroque, just in its very essence, the style of the French overture. even more than maybe any of the other variations or the aria. Definitely not the aria. The aria can be translated beautifully to the piano. But this one, I think this is maybe the one above all the other 29 that I would pick needs to be on a harpsichord above all else.
And not only that, but this particular recording, which is Jean Rondeau, as you said, there's a lot of harpsichord recordings out there of this famous work. And I know I'm saying this as somebody who is a big fan of Netherlands Bach Society. Of course, we both are. But for this movement, this is an amazing performance throughout. And you have to listen to this if you haven't already. But specifically this movement, Variation 16, is like unparalleled. And it's the best version of Movement 16 but it's not even close, you know?
It does seem like you spent some extra effort on this one.
Yeah. This one is so perfectly executed and florid, and the mood is perfect. The way that it comes after that silence, after the first half of the whole work, as you mentioned before, everything about this particular moment in this recording is unparalleled.
Mm-hmm. And the way he has to essentially recover from 15 to get ready for 16, but then musically speaking, even without any exaggeration, he still has to start 16 with his own upbeat that has to be almost like martial in style, like beating a drum baton or stomping a staff on the ground, almost the way he breathes to get ready for this, as you would if you were a conductor doing something so marked and march-like. And then it all changes as well, as is the style, and Bach is brilliantly using the second section, the B section of music of the Goldberg Variation structure, to transition into the second section of a French overture, which is commonly in triple meter. The second half is in a different meter.
Yeah.
It's the same variation, but it's a variation of this variation in a way. But in another way, you could say it's not, because it's doing exactly what a French overture in the Baroque period would do. It goes into 3 and becomes imitative, almost like a fugue. In many ways, it just basically is a 3-part fugue, more or less. And in this section, the number of beats and number of measures, which in the Goldberg Variations is almost always, or I think always, 16 in these sections. 16 before and then 16 after, is almost obscured the first time you listen to it if you don't know exactly what meter you're in yet, because the meter has just changed. And then you've got this clear cadence of 1, 2, 3, 1. But to me, the first time listening to this, I wasn't sure exactly where I was, and I wasn't sure if that was coming into measure 8 or measure 9, like 1, 2, 3, 8, 2, 3, 9, like new section there.
Right.
That is what it is. Or if it was like coming into the new section as in 1, 2, 3, there is the halfway point of the B section. And that makes a difference in the way you perceive it, probably subconsciously, but I was thinking about it consciously because I was very confused the first time hearing the Goldberg Variations ever. And then you get the repeat sign to give you another shot to realize that this is not some freely composed fugue with a variable number of bars and episodes between entries. No, it's actually exactly the same measure structure as the aria.
Yeah, although it's 32 instead of 16, just by nature of it being these short bars of 3/8.
That's true. They're kind of half. Yeah, they're kind of like half bars.
But he picked 3/8, not 6/8, and that's intentional too, as you said, Christian. That's because that's how these overtures usually were. Mm-hmm. And there's a subtle difference there between 3/8 and 6/8 in terms of how the pulse feels in Baroque music.
I'd say my favorite example is just from Cantata 61, in which you have the French overture on the melody of Savior of the Nations Come, which is quite clear in its first and second phrases. But it has 4 phrases, So the structure is a little different. He takes phrase 1 and 2 as part of the main overture. And then for phrase 3, he sets the stepwise nature of that phrase as the triple meter fugue section of that French overture. It's brilliant. And then it does return for the fourth phrase.
Another famous example from Bach of this format is the Sanctus followed by Plenisocelli from the Mass in B minor, where you have a big overture Sanctus, although that's 12/8, isn't it? So it's a little different. But then, yeah, it goes into this 3/8 fugal thing.
Same idea, yeah. Meanwhile, this French overture seemingly does not return to its march time, its cut time signature.
Right.
At least it doesn't really sound like it does. But the score tells us that it actually does. The last measure of the second ending at the very end goes back to cut time. That doesn't really matter. And practically, you could have just held a shorter note longer as the keyboardist. But it is, if indeed the copyists were correct, because we don't have the manuscript of this. But Bach probably did this. And it's like he's saying, and now we're doing this again. Now we're back to this. Even though you don't hear it go back into a double meter. And to add to the performance of this that we are using today, how about the ornamentation that he adds on the second time through this 3/8 section? It's so cool. He's added some things that are not merely decorations of single or 2 or 3 notes, but rather ways of passing and decorating 3 notes in a row in a sequence. It happens 2 or 3 times throughout this repeat, where he feels free to add even more.
Mm-hmm. These extra triplets, yeah.
Yeah, it's really above and beyond this one.
Yeah. And now, here is that first ending from Variation 16, Overture of the Goldberg Variations. If this moment of Bach from a variation from the Goldberg Variations has piqued your interest about the rest of this work, of course, that 1 hour and 34-minute long video is there for you on YouTube, and we'll have the link in the description. Jean Rondeau performing this amazing work, but if that seems a little bit steep of a time commitment for you, you should totally just click that link and then pick a random one. Just find a random variation. All the timestamps are there in the YouTube video as well. That's a great thing about the Goldberg Variations. You can skip around if you want, or you can, make an evening out of it. Ooh, I wonder if we could do like a thing where there's got to be some wine pairings, to these variations. Maybe there's a way to view this while you're having a little charcuterie or something, and then each variation is a different little snack.
Mm.
I think there's something fun we could do with that.
Ooh, I like that.
Maybe that'll be a summer project.
I'm thinking about that.
That's Bachtoberfest material right there.
Every canon would be something.
Well, you can't have you don't want to have 30 different drinks. But my point is, you have a couple different types of wine that you're sampling. Maybe a couple of cocktails.
You have a bruschetta bruschetta fuggetta.
Something French.
And then you have something French for the French overture. And then you
have
get
oysters for that black pearl.
Quad libations.
The quad libet, everything should be fancy, but then at the end, the quad libet should just be beer. You just drink out of a beer stein. Yeah.
It's just because it's like folk songs. Yeah, this is good. And then the aria is, da capo, so you have to do whatever you did first at the end again.
Yeah, that's probably just like a standard like red wine or something. It's just like.
Yeah, this like makes itself. This
is pretty good. I'm writing it down.
What else is there? There's a canon at the quart.
Canon at the pint. And we're gonna do that later.
We're gonna do more. All right. What is up for next week?
Next week we take a look at a delightful and obscure little aria by Bach, BWV 505, Vergiss mich nicht, Forget Me Not.
Until next time, enjoy those moments.